Lanny Davis, Bill Clinton's guy? Michael Cohen's lawyer? On this show? Really? Yes, really. And before you bail, let's get something out of the way. We've spent years telling you the other side isn't the enemy, that we meet people where they're at. That's right. Real easy to say when the guest already agrees with me. So here's me today actually doing it. Now, I already know what some of you are thinking. Well, Brian, this guy spent the 90s defending Bill Clinton. What could he possibly have for me? Fair enough. And I thought the same thing. So I went digging for the part on his resume that nobody on his book tour is asking about. And I found it. And then he sat down and he told me I had it wrong. Okay, I'll get there in a second, because here's what I knew walking in. In 2005, George W. Bush put a Democrat on the board that watches the spies. One Democrat, 5 members, and the phone call inviting him came from Karl Rove. He has the highest clearance in the building. He sat inside the intelligence agencies and he watched the surveillance program run in real time, and then he walked out. Now, I read that as a principled resignation. Guy sees something wrong, quits over it, and then walks into Congress and says so. And that's how I teed it up. First thing he did was wave me off. He said it sounds a lot more principled than it actually was. Alrighty then. But stay with me, because what he said after that is the entire reason that this episode exists. See, when I brought up the surveillance state, the flock cameras, the plate readers, every car in America getting logged and shared between departments, he didn't dodge. He went straight to 1984, Big Brother, and he said, look how fast history caught up. And then Bill Clinton's impeachment lawyer said this out loud on my show, that the bigger government gets, the more he finds himself agreeing with who? The Libertarians. His words, not mine. So now let me turn this around on us for a second. How many times have you heard somebody on our side say, oh, there's nobody left over there to talk to? They're all gone. That conversation, it's dead. That you may as well not even bother. I may have said something similar enough right here on this very show. And then here comes Lanny, who has every reason in the world to write us off. And he shows up, sits down, and starts listing all that we agree on. But Brian, he's a Democrat. Yep, he is. And he showed up, unlike literally dozens of other Democrats we've invited here on the show over the past few years. So maybe the question was never whether common ground exists out there. Maybe the question is whether we'll pick up the phone when somebody calls. Yeah, let's talk about that. And real quick, before we get into today's episode, today we are brought to you by Cardio Miracle. And I'm about to spend half an hour or so with a guy who's been in more high-stakes rooms than most people have been in meetings, 50 years worth likely. So you don't need to do that running on 4 hours of sleep and gas station coffee. And that's where Cardio Miracle supports your body's own nitric oxide production. Blood flow, energy, the stuff that decides whether you actually show up sharp or just show up. Yeah, another supplement plug. No, I take it. That's the whole endorsement. So head over to cardiomiracle.com/TBNS. It's going to get you 15% off your order. Links in the description. Go take care of your heart and yourself. And now let's go on to our conversation with Lanny Davis. My guest today has been in the room for basically every major American political fight in like the last 30 years. Special counsel to President Bill Clinton, the impeachment era spokesman appointed by George W. Bush to the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board, the only Democrat on it. And then he resigned in protest when the White House gutted his own board's report. 6 years later, as a legal advisor to Michael Cohen. Yeah, he's writing the Purple Nation column over at Real Clear Politics and his brand new book, Finding the Third Way, Lessons in the Politics of Civility from My Journey Through History, with a foreword from President Bill Clinton himself. Same church, different pew. Yeah, we're about to find out. Lanny Davis, welcome to the Brian Nichols Show. How you doing?
Well, thanks for that intro. I have to tell you, I have 4 children and 7 grandchildren, and I am still working. But when you have 4 sons, they all are wise guys, and they almost all say the same words to their dad, which is, "Dad, how'd you show up in so many places in American history? Who are you, Zelig?" And that's their sarcastic comment to their father.
Well, how about this? Let's start somewhere in today's conversation. I've watched a few of your appearances, and I think this is somewhere nobody else on your tour has started yet. And it's not with the book, it's not with Bill Clinton. It's 2007, and that's where you quit your job that most people would candidly kill for, right? So walk me through the day you found out that your own board's report had been entirely rewritten. I'm fascinated to hear how that happened and what took place behind the scenes.
Well, it sounds more principled than it really was. There was just some editing done of what was a bipartisan panel that Congress created after 9/11, and it was 5 members, and there had to be at least one member of the opposite party. So I was the lone Democrat that President Bush suggested I be a member of that panel. And I have to just do a sidebar that when President Bush, who was my fraternity brother at Yale and Delta Kappa Epsilon and good friend, proposed
Wait, pause. There must be some fun stories there
a lot
with
of deep,
George Bush.
a lot of deep stories in me and George Bush, and they're in the book that I wrote. But
Perfect.
my story to you is that when I got the call to be invited to be on the board, it came from none other than the senior political guru. Uh, I don't know if I should mention his name, but in any case, from the Oval Office saying the boss is here. And when he proposed your name to be on this panel, we almost fell off our chairs. We were so shocked to have your name mentioned around here. But I ended up that I served, and there was a quarrel I had with the general counsel to the president about something we had written. And as I look back, it wasn't a principled resignation, but I just said, wait a minute, we are either independent or we're not. And I'm out of here. And I'll tell you the name of who called me was Karl Rove. And when Karl Rove uh, heard that I wanted to resign, he put the word out saying, we're giving Lanny Davis a soft landing. This isn't a controversy. He's just done his duty, and that's all. So that's my story of President Bush, my old friend from Yale days, putting me on this great board involving intelligence matters post 9/11.
Now, this all obviously snowballs into what, and keep me honest here, inevitably was revealed by Edward Snowden, right? With a lot of those warrantless surveillance, financial tracking types of scenarios that were behind the scenes. Is that correct?
Well, it was almost approaching that. The idea of this board was a bipartisan congressional post 9/11 board to be sure that the government didn't go too far in the necessity of finding the bad guys and the terrorists to avoid another 9/11. And I was proud to serve. But yes, we did get into some of the areas where the government might have gone too far. And it did lead to congressional legislation to fix the problem because back when the legislation was passed, the notion of software and computers and a lot of technology wasn't around, so they didn't use the right words to get the authority they needed. So we basically fixed the situation, worked with Senator Susan Collins from Maine and Senator Joe Lieberman, the late Senator Lieberman, my close friend. And we got the legislation fixed. President Bush was happy. We were happy. And that's when I got off the board.
So you had the highest clearance, right, in the building?
Yes.
Is that correct? So I'm
I,
sure there are things that even now you can't talk about, but what are some of the things that we've seen come to light in recent days that you say, "Oh, yep, I knew that 20 years ago."
well, I can tell you one non-class. I had to be cleared at the highest level. Compartmentalization is the name. And I did get to go into the intelligence agencies and watch the anti-terrorism surveillance program in real time. And as a lawyer, I was very conscious of what needed to be done to make it legal and what we were going to recommend. But at one point, at the top of that particular alphabet soup agency, whose name you would recognize, came over to me, and he seemed nervous, especially a man of his stature. And he said, "So what do you think, Mr. Davis? You're down here observing this program." And I said, "Why are you nervous?" And he said, "Well, a lot of us think you're going to go out and hold a press conference and go at us." And I said, "Actually, I am critical, but in a respect that you're probably going to be surprised about. You have so many checks and balances on what these young people are doing to save us from the bad guys in another terrorist attack. I think you're going too far." You could just see how relieved he was that here I am, a liberal Democrat, that he was all concerned about how I was going to react to seeing the program in real time. So I do think the government went out of its way to check the boxes on Fourth Amendment and various privacy issues. But when I came down, it was really, I think we were going so many checks and balances here, we may miss people who are trying to kill us. And that's when the legislation with Senator Collins and Senator Lieberman taking the lead was fixed so that they were able to stay within the Constitution and the right to privacy and Fourth Amendment, but still get the bad guys.
Do you feel that we've maintained the guardrails that were in place then today?
The answer is probably not in some instances, because when you're in government, you tend to get a little bit too relaxed and complacent when things are going well. So I think it's important for whoever is the president, whoever is in charge of the agencies in the intelligence world, they need a third party just to remind them of where the red lines are. This particular panel went out of existence after serving a certain time period. So I think we should be very careful when we're allowing government to listen in on or do anything that intrudes on people's privacy, and they accidentally listen in on conversation involving an American, and that's where the line drawing needs.
So I want to fast forward to I listened to an interview you did over on Morning Joe. It's funny. I listen to Morning Joe every now and then, and I have these flashbacks back to where and I worked on a congressional campaign in 2012, and the candidate I listened to, we'd be driving across the district in the early AM, and he'd be listening to Morning Joe. But anyways, different story for a different day. But I remember you were on that conversation with him, and you were talking about the three members who were fired off that same exact board. And now it's lost quorum, still doesn't have one, which means nobody is writing that Section 702 report this year. So you told Morning Joe there's fault on both sides. So I would love to see, apply it here. Like, is what's happening to that board right now worse than what happened to you? Like, what are you seeing there?
No, I think what happened to me was an exception to the rule that everybody wanted to be careful. That's why I said I was concerned they were maybe being too careful and we were missing the bad guys coming after us again. This is supposed to Osama bin Laden. So I'm pretty okay, have confidence in these intelligence agencies, and they're patriots and they know about where the lines are. I'm okay with it now, but I think your question is extremely important. We never should assume that government isn't going to go a little bit too far unless there's somebody there to say stop, especially in the world of intelligence. And that's why the board was such a good idea. And it did go out of existence. Probably doesn't need to be new legislation, but there does need to be somebody, at least at the White House level, concerned that the lines are followed.
And the evolution of my show has come from much more of the small L libertarian ethos and that
Right.
civil liberties, the right to privacy, those Fourth Amendment protections you were speaking of, they are very much the blinking red lights. And we're seeing a lot of those conversations today with flock cameras. Those are the topic du jour, and understandably so. You see, I'm not sure if you saw this, Lanny, but there was a visual where it was a map, and on this map it shows the increase in the number of flock cameras in just a short 6-year period. And it's mind-blowing to think that now, more or less, you have every American citizen being tracked by the government, seemingly at the violation of the Supreme Court. But man, talk about how quickly that snowball can really grow, especially back to where you were 20 years ago. The technology was not nearly up to snuff where now Flock is leveraging AI and now all these different communities can talk together using these cameras. And I don't know, it's starting to paint this very dystopian picture that I was told we were against with communist China. But I don't know, I'm looking in my backyard. It seems like it got to America. Am I being a little too out there in the worrisome world, or is there a little truth to my concerns?
Not at all. I'm a couple of generations older than you are, but there was a book when I was in high school called 1984 by George Orwell, in which he predicted that a government would be so pervasive in watching everyone that government was called Big Brother. And the line in 1984, which is some years ago, but back then was way ahead of time, was Big Brother is watching you. And look at how fast history is caught up with the reality. So it's an ongoing issue. The bigger government is, the more I feel shared wisdom with libertarians. In fact, a good part of the book that I wrote is that there's common ground between Trump voters and liberal Democrats like myself, more than it meets the eye with all the rhetoric. And that's one of them, that we're all concerned about government being too big and too intrusive. And there is common ground in all of us being libertarians.
Yeah, well, and what a great transition into discussing your brand new book, Finding the Third Way: Lessons in the Politics of Civility from My Journey Through History. And yes, there is a foreword from President Clinton himself. But let's talk quickly about
Thank
that
you.
book, because one of the underlying ethos of the show that we've had quite literally since the beginning, Lanny, is to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. And the idea of, going out and I love that you did this thing called the Civility Project, right? Where you're asking 535 members of Congress and the 50 governors to sign a civility pledge, and only how many? Three of them actually signed, right? But
Yes.
like, come on, like the idea is, should you not, at the very least, even if you vehemently disagree with somebody, be able to engage in a civil dialogue? Because gosh darn it, I can almost guarantee that of the 535 members of Congress plus those 50 governors, there might be a few folks that are underneath their jurisdiction that maybe don't agree with them 100%. So can we not at the very least have a civil dialogue? So talk to us about the Civility Project. What did that look like, and why only three members, elected members of any office actually signed?
Well, a friend who had seen me on television many times and became a friend invited me to speak to a convention in Dallas, Texas, of born again Christians and quite conservative Republican audience. Thought I did so well that he asked me about this idea of a civility commitment in politics. And I called my best friend from law school and college, named Joe Lieberman, the late great senator from Connecticut. And he thought it was a great idea. And he did test it out. So it wasn't as if we didn't get the word around to everyone. But even back in those days, this is before our current hyper polarization culture that we're in, people were a little bit hesitant about, well, I don't want to be the only one that signs on to civility if I'm being attacked. And Joe Lieberman and I just kind of shook our heads and said, this says it all. And this is way before the era of Mr. Trump and MAGA and fault on the Democratic side of name calling and labeling people, which is my current criticism of the Democratic Party, is that we're back to labeling. So I think this is a very important question you've asked. Civility in politics is possible even when you strongly disagree. And I have very good friends who are Mr. Trump supporters. And sometimes I can't possibly understand why they're supporters. And they say it back to me, how can you be for the Democrats who are only in favor of big government and high taxes and all the things that we Democrats are mislabeled? And we, on both sides, once you have a conversation, you say, wait a minute, we agree on a lot of that. And that's what my book is about.
Well, and here I'll play sales guy here for a little bit, because for folks playing along in the home game, they know that my day job, I'm in the world of sales, specifically in the business technology space. And we know the truth, right? And that is, the squeakiest wheel will get the grease. And unfortunately, Lanny, when you look at both the left and the right, who are the loudest voices? They predominantly tend to be some of the more radical voices. So you look at, the Democratic side and you say, well, there's this misconception that we're pro big government, big welfare programs, but then you see folks like the Zoran Mandani's mayor of New York City and the other folks who are running for different city positions there under his umbrella of the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America. And then you see folks like Kathy Hochul, governor of my former home state of New York, seemingly, playing buddy buddy with someone like that. And I guess it does raise an eyebrow because you say, well, which direction will the party go? Is it going to follow the sentiment where the younger voters seem to be gravitating more towards, which unfortunately, in my perspective, is going more towards an anti-capitalist perspective? And you know what? Darn it, I think it's okay to say that's an anti-American perspective in many cases because a lot of the values we see being brought up by some of those candidates are almost antithetical to American values. I forget the one woman who was running for city council there in New York City, but said, and I quote, my hands were dirty, my mouth was dirty, I didn't have a napkin, so I used the American flag. What? Like, that's not civil. And I guess that right there, right? And this is not to excuse away. There are absolutely folks on the political right, and I've called them out by name. Here on this show many a time over our 1,000+ episodes, who are equally to be looked at with some raised eyebrows. But I guess my question to you, Lanny, is when you look at some of those louder voices, is it unfair to give the Democratic Party, or even in this case, maybe the Republican Party, unfair labels when you see some of the more centrist types folks like the Kathy Hochul's of the world, at the very least, playing footy with some of the folks who are raising those alarms?
It's certainly not unfair to use a double negative. I'm working on, I write a column every so often on realclearpolitics.com, and I'm working on something. There is an organization that Joe Lieberman, who I mentioned earlier, my late great best friend from the state of Connecticut, the United States Senator, started an organization called No Labels. And what he was referring to is exactly what the Democratic Party is responsible for. And I blame everybody, including a really talented political figure in our party, Mayor Zamdani. I blame him for using, and Bernie Sanders even more, for using the word socialist. That's a label, and it isn't a specific program, and it allows it to be twisted. And of course, they don't really believe in socialism, which is government ownership of private enterprise. Last time I looked, government didn't do such a great job. I would trust private enterprise that's driven by profit and margins and money a lot more than I would to trust government. So they're not in favor of socialism, but they allow the label to really leave a wrong impression. There's one quote from Harry Truman. I'll end my comment to you about blaming the Democrats for not doing this. When he was running for re-election in 1948, after Franklin Roosevelt passed, it was his really first time running, he had a quote that was sent to me by someone who heard me being interviewed about my book. And the quote was, when we passed Social Security, the Republicans called us socialists. When we supported health care and aid to education, the Republicans called us socialists. Why aren't Democrats today saying, here's our program? We support private enterprise in the delivery of medical care using the Obamacare websites as competitive places where insurance companies could bid for our business. That's what Obamacare was. It was private enterprise-based competition on the websites. But that's not the way it was sold to the American people. It looked like it was Medicare government takeover. So we Democrats slip into giving people who are critics excuses to attack us by using labels rather than facts and specific programs. And that's a long speech about my book. Finding common ground is possible between Democrats and Trump voters if we talk about specific programs and specific issues and avoid these labels like socialists or other such labels.
Well, and let's talk about that a little bit more in detail, because let's examine where some of these more I'm going to call them more aggressive voices on the predominant left and right, where they come from. And, I come up from the era, I grew up in a Republican family through and through. We were George Bush, Ronald Reagan, John McCain, Mitt Romney, rah, rah, rah. We carried the banner, right? And, that's the world I grew up in. And I watched time and again the promises of my party constantly fall flat, right? And you see this quite a bit with the war over the war on terror, where it turned into a decade plus over in the Middle East, where lots of my generation fought blood and they spent blood and treasure overseas and come back, and it destroyed thousands of young men and women in my generation from a mental health standpoint as well. And then you factor in the bailouts of 2008 and then the reaction therein from the left. You had the Occupy Wall Street on the right. You had the Tea Party reaction to the passing of Obamacare, which, if we're going to be fair as well, Lanny, the Obamacare was also helped to be written by a lot of those folks in the insurance industry that helped cause a lot of the problems to begin with. But that might be a different conversation for a different day. But you see time and again, and you go forward, right? And it all kind of really snowballed up to in 2020 with the COVID lockdowns and the attempt by the federal government to force vaccinations using regulatory standards that they're going to push through OSHA, and the almost two world America that was created with the did you have your vax or did you not? And then the social the social shame that came with that. If you didn't have your vax, you weren't allowed to go to Thanksgiving. You weren't allowed to go to Christmas because you might kill grandma. Even though it comes to find out that Dr. Fauci maybe didn't tell the truth about if the shot was going to give you pure immunity and not or rather it would prevent you from passing the disease to somebody else. Again, different conversation for a different day. My point being is a lot of that sentiment, it fosters resentment and it fosters it fosters extremes on each side of the aisle, and we saw that really manifest not only in 2016 with the advent of Donald Trump, but then just a few years later with Bernie Sanders and a lot of his Bernie team, and even Ron Paul, right before Donald Trump, Ron Paul was starting to bring a lot of that anti-government, anti-regulatory fervor from the younger voting blocks that were getting more and more upset with the status quo. So to say all that, civility is important, absolutely, but as much as true tangible outcomes. And I feel a lot of folks are candidly, they're frustrated. They feel that they're at a wit's end, and they're looking for the biggest hammer in the china shop to cause as much damage as possible because they feel that they need to do something different because what they've been doing hasn't been working. Now, as a sales guy, I love that because my biggest competition is the status quo, but I also need to have a plan in place to make sure that we don't devolve into chaos. Like I'm selling a new phone system and I don't have a good, system in place to replace what they have today. And we just, hope and pray, God bless us, that it's going to go well. So that's the same thing here is that a lot of folks are looking at what's happened and they're saying, you know what, I'm just going to blow it up. There's a lot of nihilism, a lot of cynicism. So I said a lot there, and that was my speech, Lanny. What would you say to those folks, right? They say, the heck with your civility. I want my life to get better, and I'm not seeing it get better. Help.
Well, first of all, that's a great speech, great commentary. I agree with all of it. And if both sides could listen the way I just listened to you, we would be surprised at how much we have in common, even if we differ on choices of candidates or particular policies. There's a great common thread on the left and the right in both parties for there to be civility and let's figure it out together. It's probably an 80% or any poll that's 80-20 is about the best you're ever going to get when you're asking a polling question. That's an 80-20 issue. Let's talk about it and let's not call each other names or give each other labels that are off-putting. I found Mayor Zamdani off-putting when he kept insisting on all the grocery stores are going to be government owned and we're going to reduce prices when he defined socialism. Well, he didn't mean that. And now I'm hearing the Democratic Socialists be called communists by President Trump. And I don't think President Trump means that either. We all know the difference of what communism is, which is a dictatorship. But my point is that the conversation should be focused on specific facts, programs, not labels, not accusations. And then we'll get somewhere because we're going to be surprised at the amount we have in common.
Well, unfortunately, I just looked at the clock. We're getting close to time, which means this is the part where we get ready to start saying goodbye, and we do our part called final thoughts. So I'll kick things off, Lanny, and then I'll turn it over to you. Obviously, we want folks to better understand where to find this brand new book, but also to reach back out to you if they want to continue the conversation. So first, let me just say, civility in this world is so important, and especially between generations. I'm seeing more and more, and I'm guilty of this, right? I'm going to raise my hand and say I've been guilty of this. There's been a big battle between like the millennials and the boomers lately. I've been seeing it on social media, and it's very important to instill this dirty word that nobody seems to like to use nowadays, and it's called empathy. And empathy, not weaponized empathy, but true empathy, where you put yourself in someone else's shoes. It's important for all of us to do that, and that's, I think, the first step of having a civil conversation, because if you don't truly take a second to understand what it is, not just what it is the person you're speaking to believes, but why, right? To truly understand, to feel it, that part is so important. There's that old Ben Shapiro, right? The Ben Shapiro, "Facts don't care about your feelings," right? Quote. But you know what? Feelings, they sure do matter when you're trying to move people, and help them make a buying decision, right? Emotion is the number one uh, trigger in the world of sales in terms of someone making a tangible buying decision. Now, what are they going to do? They're going to spend time afterwards using facts, figures, logic, and reason to justify that buying decision. But the emotional trigger, that is what gets them to buy. Usually it's out of fear or love or a combination therein. Some people seem to love to be afraid, Lanny. I'm learning that as well. But again, maybe that's a different conversation for a different day. But I say all that when you're talking to the average voter, the average citizen. We've been very much in this society, and I don't know if the social media is part of it, the TikTok generation or what, but it seems that everybody goes in wanting to have a hot take, right? They're ready to own the libs or to make the cons cry. It's something like that always, and I don't think that's healthy for society. I see there's on YouTube this show called oh goodness, Jubilee, and they wave the red flags, right? And there's one guy in the middle, and it's surrounded by, I think, like
Yeah.
20 people who disagree, and it's just a big debate. And I get it. Like there's some folks who go in wanting to have an actual dialogue, but there's other folks who are just looking for their 15 seconds of fame where they can get that clip, right? And they can put it on social media and they can signal to their audience what a good, virtuous person they are. Meanwhile, our country devolves more and more into this camp versus this camp. And I don't like that, because you know what camps end up devolving to? Battle lines. And I don't, that's a scary world. I don't want to see a world where dun 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 civil war, right? Like, and I know some folks use that term very loosely, but it's not good. Like, we've had folks on the show here who have been overseas in combat zones that were going through civil war. No bueno, right? Like, very, very, very dark, dirty, scary stuffs. And that's not a world that I want my kids growing up in. I don't think it's a world you want your kids or their grandkids growing up in, Lanny. So I say all that, civility. It is so fundamentally important for us, not only as a country, but as a people, to be able to find some common ground and actually, I don't know, live together on this floating rock through space. But that's my final thoughts for today. Lanny, bring us home. What are your final thoughts? And of course,
Well,
where can folks go ahead and reach out to you afterwards?
you make it easy. I'm somewhat older than you are, but I would just say here, every word that you said is really, if I can shamelessly plug my book,
Of course.
final comment. If you go to Amazon and look for Finding the Third Way, the third way that I'm describing is not splitting the middle in a wishy-washy center. It's listening, exactly using your words, listening to what the other person says and looking for common ground. And you'll be surprised, between conservative and liberal, red and blue states, there's a lot of common ground. So that's my book preaches, that if you disagree, there are things I'm never going to be able to agree with regarding Mr. Trump, especially personal behavior. that's who he is, and he's done very well politically with it, but I'm not a fan. But for example, Trump has made a big deal, as has the conservative movement, about our Constitution and states' rights. And I'm looking at the constitutional clause that says local elections are preserved for the states and local. Federal government stay out. That's a Republican principle. Now, when it comes to the midterms, if anybody suggests that the federal government should go into local polling places, whether it's ICE or federalized National Guard or whatever people are afraid of. All we have to do is remind conservatives and Mr. Trump, wait a minute, you're the states' rights party. We Democrats have been the big federal government party. And we know that those are both not completely accurate. So let's remember, states and local communities under the Constitution explicitly are reserved for states and local election authority. No federal troops, no federal presence, no ICE agents in the polling places. That's contrary to conservative principles about local and state government, is what the framers left for real community governing, and the federal government only where it wasn't explicitly allowed. So my view on what we have in common in the midterms should be no federal government, no FBI. This is for states and local communities. I sound pretty conservative when I say that, because that's a constitutional principle.
The book is keep me honest here. Finding the Third Way. Website's LannyJDavis.com. That's where you can buy it as well. Is that right, Lanny?
Yes. Thank you. I hope you buy it and hope you enjoy it. It is filled with a lot of Lanny stories about my life, and my children say, Dad, you made half of those stories up. And I always say, well, even when I make them up, they're still great stories. So.
Lanny, appreciate you. The book, folks, is
Thanks.
Finding the Third Way. Go pick it up. We'll include those links in the show notes. Lanny Davis, thanks for joining the show. And now we do the thing we do. So here's his scorecard. 3 things I think Lanny got right, 3 where he lost me, just being real. And one of those is going to be pointed at us. But first, what Lanny got right. And number 1, and I did not see this one coming, I asked him about flock cameras, about plate readers, every car in America getting logged, every department sharing the data. And as a lifelong Democrat, Bill Clinton's impeachment lawyer and BFFs with Joe Lieberman, he did not answer the way I thought he was going to. He went straight to Orwell, 1984. Big Brother's watching you. And he said, look how fast history caught up. And then he used the word libertarian twice in one answer. He said, the bigger government is, the more I feel shared wisdom with libertarians. Like, that's not a guy softening for a podcast audience. He brought it up. I didn't. Number 2, the labeling argument. Lanny didn't come out here to tell me that Republicans are the problem. He named his own party out loud. He mentioned Mondami by name, Bernie Sanders by name, for letting the word socialist do the thinking for them. And then he pulled a Harry Truman quote from 1948, back when Republicans called Social Security socialism. His point, the label is the enemy of the argument, both directions. How often does a guy come on the show and lead with his own side's failure? Pretty cool. Number 3, the Civility Project itself. He and Joe Lieberman asked 535 members of Congress and 50 governors to sign a pledge to be civil. 3 signed. 3 out of 585. That's half of 1%. And here's where I'm going to play sales guy, because it's my day job. That's not a failed idea. That's just a failed prospect list. They were pitching civility to 585 people in the country who profit actually the most against civility. They actually want a fight. So, of course, they're going to say no. The customer was never Congress. The customer was us. And where Lanny lost me, number 1, and I want to be careful because I think he meant this sincerely. He closed by telling conservatives, hey, you're the states' rights party. Elections belong to states and localities, so no federal agents at the polls. Okay, on the surface, fine. That's a constitutional argument, and I'll take it. But look at what that framing it quietly does. He picked the half of the fight nobody's actually having, because I don't know a single person on the right organizing around putting troops in polling places, because that's not the argument, and that's never been the argument. The argument is about who's on the rolls. It's about whether people who are citizens are casting ballots in American elections, because if you can't answer who's allowed to vote, nothing downstream really matters. Not the machines, not the maps, not the money, nothing. And he was right there. He's at the door, and then he talked about ICE agents at polling locations instead. And look, I'm not saying he did that on purpose. I think that's just a reflex of literally decades of being in Washington. Number two, and let me take his principle and I'm going to run it all the way out because it's going to cut in both directions. He says elections belong to states and localities. Great. I agree. So apply it everywhere. The same principle blocks Washington preempting state election law. Okay. That blocks the feds dictating voter roll maintenance, ID requirements, verification standards, all of it. And his party has spent years arguing the exact opposite. So which is it? Is it a principle, or is it a tool you pick up when it's pointed at the other guy? And before anybody on my side gets comfortable, we do the same thing. We are the federalism party. Well, we're supposed to be, right up until a federal court might rule our way. And then suddenly we love federal power. And that's a bed that the right has made too. And number three, it's not on Lanny. It's on me. Oops. His whole thesis is to drop labels and argue about specific programs. And then I ended up sitting right here and I called a position anti-American. That's a label. I did the thing. And do I stand behind the substance of what I said? Yes, I do. But he's right about the mechanic. The second I reach out for the label, the guy on the other side stops hearing my arguments and he starts defending his team. And now I've lost him and I did it to myself. And Lanny was probably too polite to point it out, so I'm going to point it out. Okay, Brian, so what do we do with all of this? Well, I opened this episode asking whether we'd pick up the phone when somebody from the other side calls. His team called, and he was wrong, I would say, about some things. I was wrong about some things, and he corrected me, 90 seconds in, and I left every second of it in the episode. And that's what this actually looks like. It's not two guys agreeing. It's two guys staying in a conversation together. Same church, different pew? Not quite. Not on everything, but same building. and that's more than most of us have probably managed this week. So with that being said, here's your homework. Find the one person you've written off, that uncle that you've not talked to because of that just one Thanksgiving argument that went a little too far. That one coworker, right, that you do not agree with, so you actively avoid having any conversation about current events. Or that guy who lives in your comment section. Yeah, I see you, because you're in mine. And then ask them why. Not what they think, but rather why they think it. And you know what? I think you're going to be surprised how often the answer is something you probably would have ended up saying yourself. And that's it. That's the whole strategy. Meet people where they're at. The book is Finding the Third Way. Links are in the description. Go grab a copy. And reminder, today's episode is brought to you by Cardio Miracle. Head to cardiomiracle.com/TVNS and you're going to get 15% off your order. Find me at B Nichols Liberty. Email me, Brian@BrianNicholsShow.com. And don't forget, we have new episodes airing every Thursday. Sorry I was late last week. My re-air of our episode with David Osborne. I was traveling. Sorry. Life happens. All right, folks. I hope you had some fun today, and I hope today's episode left you educated, enlightened, and informed. With that being said, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to The Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at BrianNicholsShow.com.